Welcome to the Cannabis Enlightened podcast with Dr. Leroy, brought to you by March and Ash at marchandash.com. I'm Chris Cantori, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to your host, Dr. Leroy.
Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Cannabis Enlightened. I am your host, Dr. Leroy, and today we have a very special episode for you. Someone that I met at a conference in November, Cannapharma Conference. And the Cannapharma Conference, when I first heard of it, I thought it would be a bunch of scientists, and intellectuals, and they would be discussing things far over my head. Well, it was a lot of intellectuals. But after a while, a gentleman came on that I had to take a second look because he started to make sense, meaning I could understand what he was talking about. And he really had a lot to say about cannabis and the benefits of testing cannabis. And in just a minute, I'm going to let him introduce himself and give you a little bit of background of where he is, what he does, and who he does this thing for, so that everyone will have a background knowledge. So without any further ado, Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It's great to be here. My name is Kristofer Marsh. I am the Chief Scientific Officer with Cannabis and Hemp Laboratory based out of Florida called Green Scientific Labs. I've been in the cannabis testing space for about 4.5 years now. I graduated from UCLA in 2017 and have been involved in this space ever since. I did my PhD at UCLA in chemistry. And that was right around the time when the California regulated market just became a regulated market. And what a great time to get involved. Brief history, I've been involved with a couple of different cannabis labs, a few actually, two up in Berkeley, California, and then I moved down to LA and started a lab there from the ground up. And I'm now Chief Scientific Officer at Green. So I've definitely seen a lot of different the evolution of the market, and the testing market has been really exciting to watch. And there's a lot of stuff happening that I think, you see in the news sometimes, or just the safety of cannabis, that I think testing is a huge part of that. It's an integral part of making the regulated market successful. So yeah, but really happy to be on your podcast today. It was great to meet you at the conference.
Thank you very much. You're absolutely right that cannabis became legal in California, I believe in 2016. So as you came out of your PhD program, you were poised and ready to be part of a great industry. So with that in mind, you work for Green Scientific Labs. Is that correct?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
That's right. Okay. So what do you do there? What happens at Green Scientific Labs?
That's a good question. In states where cannabis is medical or adult use or recreational, legalized, most states, all of them I can think of, have instituted a testing policy where before you sell your product as a licensed producer of cannabis, whether that's, flower or oils or edibles or infused topical products, many of these states require you to get your product tested. And that's, so we do testing for both hemp and marijuana clients. In Florida, they call it marijuana. It's called, usually the differentiator is it's marijuana or hemp to the federal government. I prefer to say cannabis because it includes everything and it's a more scientific term. But we test products for our clients. So we'll test, anything from flower to vape carts to gummies and edibles, topicals. I had shrimp scampi one time. All the innovative products out there, we'll test those for cannabinoid potency. So, when you go to look at your product, how much THC is in there, how much CBD is in there, what's the percentage? If it's a 5 milligram edible, are you getting a 5 milligram edible, or is it 4.8 grams or 5.2? So we measure that. We also do safety testing on the product in addition to potency. So we'll test for pesticides, heavy metals, solvents, microbial contamination, things like, salmonella, mold, things of that nature. And we also do terpene testing. So if you've heard of terpenes before, they're kind of like the flavor molecule. We do testing for that. And in Florida, where our headquarters is based, that's required if you're a licensed cannabis producer there to sell it to consumers. And like I said, we also do a very similar set of testing for our hemp and CBD clients. Now that's a little bit trickier because the USDA does not have safety testing rules for hemp and CBD yet. They really just have rules around THC content. So they say that you can't have a product that has more than 0.3% THC in it if you're going to sell it as hemp or as CBD. A lot of people don't want to get their product tested for things like pesticides and metals anyway, because obviously it's a risk to to public health for things to be released to consumers that haven't been tested.
So, Chris, wherever cannabis is legal and it's allowed to be sold, then you're supposed to be testing the product, or at least a lab is supposed to be testing the product.
That's right. Yeah. In every state where cannabis has been made legal, they have, as part of the regulations, they have testing requirements. So there's testing labs popping up all over the place across the country, in states where they're legal. And there's also, hemp and CBD labs, which is, some of them do cannabis testing, some of them don't.
So you have to be up on all the regulations, the testing regulations throughout the country, I would imagine.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, we've been testing hemp and CBD for, that's how Green Scientific really got its start. In fact, our phone number was 1-800-TEST-CBD. And, since the Farm Bill in 2018, a lot's really evolved. Different states are, I'm specifically talking about the hemp and CBD market right now. Originally, it was just make sure it's 0.3% THC or lower. Now, states like California, Colorado, and others are implementing their own regulations because they see like a lack of regulations at the federal level. They say that, if you're going to sell your CBD product to someone in the store, just like food, like there's got to be certain limits that you can't allow, pesticides, or metals, or bacteria. It's got to be below a certain level. And believe it or not, the USDA hasn't set those for hemp and CBD yet. So yeah, different states are bringing them online. And that's really, you kind of hit at one of the biggest pain points of being a testing lab, is that it seems like every week the regulations are updated to change. They're changed, and one state might add regulations, another state might make a tweak to theirs or something like that. So it's a lot to follow and track for sure.
So if a state does not have regulations, or if someone is exposed to or takes consumes some cannabis that has not gone through the testing, what is the issue with that? What problem might occur?
Well, I think so. I don't want to get our terms confused here. So I'm going to say, let's talk specifically about what most people would refer to as medical marijuana or adult use recreational marijuana. I'll put CBD and hemp and CBD to the side for a second. First of all, if you're buying something that, like if you're buying marijuana or adult in an adult use market or a medical market where it's legal, if you're buying it that where it's not tested, that probably means you're buying it from what most people call like the black market. You got a friend who gets it from a person, and who's got a guy, and they're selling it to you at a pretty good price, which that's the way it's been for years and years and years. In fact, the legal market wouldn't be here if it weren't for people selling it kind of under the table. So I personally don't have a problem with that from it might be weird to say, but I don't have a problem with that at a fundamental level. But the risk is that now you're buying product that you don't know what's in it. And I'm not talking about THC and CBD. Yes, it's nice to know, how strong your product is, how much percent THC and CBD is in there. But if you buy product from someone, like if you go to your dealer and buy an eighth of flour, uh, that flour might have pesticides in it. Might have mold growth in it, which can lead to other toxins. It might have a heavy dose of heavy metals, depending on the nutrients in the water and the soil that grower, whoever grew it, used. And that can be, it can be dangerous. It can be very problematic, especially with people who have compromised immune systems already and they're using it for medicine. I wouldn't go to CVS, for example, and like buy some aspirin off the shelf and think to myself, I wonder if this aspirin has pesticides in it. I just wouldn't. I would just trust that it didn't, right? And so that's why getting your sample tested and your flour tested, your product tested is so important. I had an example. It was about a year and a half ago. I've worked in California and I was running a lab in the San Fernando Valley up in LA. And one of my colleagues at the time brought in some flour that, we were going to smoke after work, as we usually did, away from the building, kind of out in the street, like, kind of like a 5 o'clock happy hour kind of thing. And so we rolled up, licked the joint, started passing it around. And I hit it a few times, we were all having a good time, went back into my office and sat down, and I started to notice a pain in my gut. And I've been in the industry for a few years to know that when I get a pain in my gut, usually what that indicates to me is that I've got some sort of pesticide issue going on. I consider it pesticide poisoning. And I never had data to back that up. But this one time, I asked my colleague, hey, do you have some of that flour? I'm just curious, where did you get that? And she said, oh, well, between you and me, I bought it at an illegal dispensary over in Pasadena. And I was like, okay, interesting. Well, do you have any more of it? And she said, yeah, take some. And I tested that for pesticides. And it was actually kind of like a really interesting moment. But sure enough, there was a healthy dose of, I forget the pesticide that was in there, but it was a healthy dose of pesticide in that flour. So, that made me feel really uncomfortable. And I kind of was cool to see the data. I felt like I sort of, took one for science that day. But that's one of the risks. It's just unknown contaminants in your product that you really shouldn't be consuming.
So, Chris, is it safe that's a very interesting story. Is it safe to say that in addition to getting an ache in your stomach, being sick, you could be worse? It could be worse. It could endanger your even living?
In most cases, you don't see, unlike alcohol, you don't hear about a lot of people dying from smoking cannabis, fortunately. It seems to be a relatively safe product all around. That being said, there are people who should be very careful. Generally, people should all be careful. I would say people with immunocompromised systems need to be very, very careful. And there was a case, it was a few years ago in the Bay Area, I believe it was in Oakland, where somebody had smoked cannabis that was very contaminated with a mold we call aspergillus. And aspergillus is a toxic fungi that is very prevalent in cannabis cultivations and grows. And the problem with aspergillus is that it also produces a toxin called we call them mycotoxins. Some are called aflatoxins, some are called ochratoxin. But these are toxic to human health, and even at low doses. And there was a case in Oakland where somebody had smoked, fungi, contaminated with aspergillus, and they actually got a disease called aspergillosis. And that I don't believe they died, but it was a very serious injury, and they were in the ER in the hospital. And that's not the only case. That's just the most recent one I know of. And people that again have immune systems that are compromised just need to be very, very careful. There's also just the risk of being very uncomfortable. If you buy something, okay, so have you ever gone and went to like maybe a party or something, and somebody had brownies, a pot brownie.
Yeah.
Well, people still make them on their own. It's all well and good. I've tried that a few times myself. But if you buy an edible or brownie or some kind of infused product um, from someone, and you don't have a certificate of analysis or a test result to show what the number of milligrams is you're going to get. Again, if you're expecting 5 milligrams, but they kind of messed up the formulation, and there's 500 milligrams in there now, you're going to go for a ride. You're going to get way more high than you ever really wanted to. And that's potentially, well, first of all, incredibly uncomfortable. No one likes to be so high that they can't function. And secondly, if you were planning on doing something, or I don't know, you decided to go drive a short distance away and you all of a sudden are quite high, it can be dangerous. You just don't want to be caught off guard. And you also don't want to take a dose that where you don't know what it is. Nobody likes to be mistakenly dosed. So those are just a couple of examples of like why testing is so important. You just want to know just what you're getting is what you're getting. Again, I use the aspirin analogy all day long. If you go to the store and you buy aspirin, it's 200 milligrams per tablet, end of story, nothing else in there, controlled, very, very tested. There's a lot of quality control, quality assurance involved with that product. And cannabis should be really no different. It's a medicine as well as a recreational product, and the people that are using it for medicine especially need to know that they can rely on it to be what they need it to be each time they use it.
Well, it sounds to me, Chris, like those couple of reasons or examples that you just gave are pretty important. I mean, you don't want to be putting something in your body that has heavy metals or pesticides or whatever else could be on it. And you certainly want to know how many milligrams, because as you were saying, that if someone takes some cannabis that has a higher level of milligrams than what their body can take, and they expect to drive home, I don't think that's going to end up very well.
No, no. Well, the driving thing's interesting too, because people try to equate you know people that drink with people who smoke and then drive. It's really dependent upon your own personal chemistry and biology, right? Because if I take 5 milligram gummy, I'm going to be able to drive with no problem at all. And in fact, I feel like that actually enhances my drive because I kind of just focus on driving and kind of get into that zone. But if my mother were to take a 5 milligram edible and then try and drive, I would say, Mom, you should hang out for a little bit. So it's completely based off of your own experience with the medicine and your tolerance levels, which it's hard to kind of, if you have a 0.02% blood alcohol content, that's the same across the board. And yes, some people are high functioning, but you can kind of measure that and set a decent limit. For cannabis, it's not really the same. But nevertheless, yeah, you shouldn't be caught off guard with the experience that you're about to have.
So I think that a lot of people try to measure or equate their alcohol consumption with a cannabis consumption. And it almost sounds like you're saying it's not the same. You might be able to tolerate more alcohol than you could with respect to cannabis.
I think it depends on, I think it depends on the individual and your personal biology and your experience with it. Obviously, as you use more cannabis, you kind of get a tolerance to it. Like if you just started out and you take a puff, you might be high for hours, but after a few months of using it every now and then, you might see that you need like 2 puffs, and then all of a sudden you're kind of back to the same point. I don't want to compare it to alcohol too much because, to be honest, I don't know as much about alcohol as I know about cannabis. But also, I generally try to just keep that comparison. I try to limit my comparisons to alcohol because they really are just completely different sort of substances.
Is it safe to say that if you're going to consume cannabis, you should just consume cannabis? If you're going to consume alcohol, you should just consume alcohol? Or is Can you mix them depending upon your metabolism?
You can mix them. I would never recommend that personally. In fact, the regulations that are coming out explicitly say that you cannot mix any of the, cannabinoids, THC, CBD with alcohol, except with the exception of tinctures. Tinctures are a very medicinal way of extracting, molecules from the plant, and it's really an ancient way of delivering medicine. But mixing, THC and CBD with beer or with wine or with hard alcohol is just states have taken a clear sort of perspective on that, in that they just do not allow it at all, and it's for a good reason. I mean, people have probably heard the term cross-faded. That's what we call it when you're very, very high and also very, very, drunk or tipsy. And when you get to a certain point with those, I'm sure some people can, again, it's all related to your personal biology or personal chemistry, but something about that combination of substances just absolutely levels people. And it just makes you incredibly, incredibly disoriented and potentially sick. So yeah, I would never recommend mixing those, and the states have taken a pretty clear stance that won't be allowed.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear you say that. That's important for listeners to hear. Now, on the packaging of, let's say, a cannabis mint or edibles, or whatever they happen to partake in, it's going to have a number on it, a milligrams, like 2.5 milligrams or 5.1 milligrams. That is in connection with the THC and or the CBD that's contained in the product?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The state of California only, so because I assume most of your listeners are, well, I hope they're all over the world, but since we're in California, I'll just speak about that. The state requires on products to list the milligrams of THC and CBD that are in that product. So if you buy a chocolate bar and it says 100 milligrams of THC on the chocolate bar, that means you're getting 100 milligrams in the entire chocolate bar. They may break each increment up into serving sizes of say 10 milligrams each, and you've got 10 squares per chocolate bar, so that's 100 milligrams, and that's what they're referring to. And that's a good way for consumers to know, if I take 5 milligrams and I feel this certain way, well then I know that every time I'm going to be buying that 10 milligram piece of chocolate, and I can sort of, in science we call it titrate. We basically kind of dose ourselves based off of what we know through experience and trial and error, maybe what is the best dose for me. It's hard to go to a doctor and have them say, hey, you should be taking 10 milligrams of THC every dose. It's just, if you're using it for recreation especially, you just kind of have to know what you like or how much you can take before you have a dose that you feel is a good experience for you. And one way to do that is through those serving sizes, like you said, and CBD too. CBD will put the milligrams. That's mostly for infused products. You wouldn't see milligrams necessarily in flower or like a vape cartridge. If you smoke a vape cartridge, you'll see that the percentage of THC is on there, or the percentage of CBD. They normally don't do milligrams of CBD or THC for a vape, but they will in edibles and things that you ingest.
So Chris, for people that are new to cannabis, but have a history of drinking, and they probably can have one or two drinks or one or two shots, and maybe immediately within maybe 10, 15 minutes, they start to feel something. Is that the same experience that one should expect from cannabis?
It's a great point. It depends, and I'll say why. So if you smoke weed, if you smoke cannabis, vape it, inhale it, essentially, you are going to feel the effects of that much faster. And I'm talking between 2 to 15 minutes. I mean, I have actually watched people smoke and seen their eyes turn red in real time. That's how fast it can go when you inhale it. The inhalation breaks the blood-brain barrier faster, and that's basically the barrier that the THC molecules have to cross to actually make it into the receptors in your brain for all of that fun high experience to occur. So when you inhale it, that process, the kinetics of that are much, much faster. If you ingest it, it depends. Traditionally, eating an edible takes a much longer time for it to kick in. In fact, a lot of edibles manufacturers now are putting on the label like, eat a piece and wait 1 hour. And if you don't feel anything, then try another piece. But the idea is people will eat it, right? And then in 5 or 10 minutes, they don't feel anything. They're like, well, I must not have had enough. Okay, let's just keep eating more and more and more. And all of a sudden now they're just going to be like incredibly high because they didn't wait long enough for it to kick in. So edibles on average are between 20 minutes to an hour for those to kick in. Flowers almost instant. Vapes, concentrates almost instant. But there has been a big push lately to make these products for beverages, drinks. They call it like a mocktail. It's not a cocktail. It's a mocktail.
Right.
And there's a big push to have the people that are drinking that infused product, like a drink product, to be able to drink alongside their friends who are drinking, beer or wine or spirits, and have a similar experience at the same time. So there's a lot of work being done to create products that actually get you that high faster after you ingest the the drink. If you drink it or you sometimes they have tinctures, you can put it under your tongue. And there's a big effort to make that effect happen faster so that people can, again, like sit with their friends who are having a drink of alcohol and, kind of kick in at the same time.
So if that's going to happen, then there's going to be a higher concentration of THC in that drink than there would be in an edible?
Not necessarily. The way they do that in a drink, it gets a little bit technical, but basically what you do is when you put THC into a drink, you have to sort of force it into the drink, because THC is kind of like Italian dressing. You know how Italian dressing separates and you have to shake it up?
Right.
THC in water is very similar. So in order to get it to stay into water, you have to surround it by molecules that are going to basically keep it from separating out of the water. And when you do that, you can kind of control the size of the particle of THC oil, I should say, that you're forcing into the drink. So it's like basically by making the THC particles smaller when you infuse them into the drink, instead of if I get a little science here for a second, if you make the THC like a micron sized, so 0.001, if you make it really small, it'll get into your system a certain rate. If you make it even smaller, it'll actually go into your system faster. And so people are working on trying to get it as small as possible. They call it nano, right? You've probably seen like nano infused. That's what that means. And what they're trying to do is make it more bioavailable to your system so that your body absorbs it faster and is uptaken, into your endocannabinoid system and all those receptors that, give you that experience.
Should a person, and this is your opinion, of course, should a person involve themselves with a drink, a cannabis drink, and an edible?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, there's a really interesting drink out there that only has 2.5 milligrams of THC. My girlfriend actually loves them, and it's a pretty light experience if you're a heavy, cannabis consumer. But I would have no problem drinking a little bit of, THC infused drink, maybe taking a 5 milligram piece of chocolate and having a pretty nice afternoon. I see no problem with that. I would do that. I've probably done that myself.
But not to mix it with alcohol.
Oh yeah, well that's a different story. Yeah, I think you got to keep the alcohol and the cannabis separate. If you've never been crossfaded, it would happen to you one time and you would never want to do that again. I'm sure it's not a great feeling.
Now, that's a great place for us to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we'll have more with our guest and Dr. Leroy. You're listening to the Cannabis Enlightened podcast, powered by March and Ash.
American democracy's good, but we can make it better. The National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers includes organizations across the country who are working right now to build a better democracy by opening primaries, implementing safe, secure voting systems, reducing corruption, and increasing transparency. Listen to our weekly podcast, How to Win Friends and Save the Republic, to hear updates from the latest movements in the democracy reform space. Subscribe and learn more about us at nonpartisanreformers.org.
Welcome back to the Cannabis Enlightened podcast. I'm Chris Cantore, and here's more from our host, Dr. Leroy Brady.
So, as we're talking about cannabis, is there a type of cannabis that will have cannabis in it, but it's not regulated? And I'm thinking of I think it's THC 8.
Delta 8, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a whole thing now. I think so that kind of goes back. We have to talk a little bit about the Farm Bill before we can talk about that, I think. So in 2018, US government passed the Farm Bill, which made hemp legal. And as a result, that's when you saw these CBD products pop up, because CBD that you see, a lot of the products you see on the shelves, those are products that are made from CBD that comes from hemp, not from what the government would call marijuana, right? Hemp would be anything that has less than 0.3% THC in it. Okay, so because of that bill, you see these products pop up, but people are getting very innovative, as people always do. They're taking the CBD that is legally produced in the United States, and they're using traditional chemistry to basically change that CBD into cannabinoids that are actually, designed to get you high. So you can take CBD and convert that into a form of THC that's actually legal. For your listeners, the form of THC that you would find in like a marijuana product, or in weed and cannabis, that's something we call it Delta 9 THC. The form of THC you get from CBD is called Delta 8. And so this has thrown a lot of people through the loop, including the government and the DEA, because formally Delta 8 THC is actually scheduled on the Controlled Substances Act as a Schedule 1 controlled substance. But in September, the DEA came out and said, well, actually, if you get Delta 8 THC converted from CBD, that's actually legal, because it's like derived from hemp. So I know it sounds confusing. It is a little confusing. It's been kind of a wild ride. Again, it's one of those things that seems to change whenever the wind blows. But as of today, this podcast, January the 20th, 2022, Delta 8 THC seems to be legal when it comes from CBD. So there's an issue where that kind of scares me as a scientist, because as a testing lab, because I see there's no regulation of these Delta 8 products at all. There's actually very little regulation of CBD products. And Delta 8, the problem with that is the way that you convert it can introduce byproducts and other sort of unknown contaminants into your product that, again, we don't really know what those byproducts are going to do. So if you've seen, I've walked into a gas station in Detroit last, I think, April. It's been around for a while now. And I saw at the gas station, Delta 8 THC vape cartridges for sale for like $20. And I thought to myself, first of all, I would never buy it from a gas station. But then I thought, how many people are, and what's in them? And so, we test these things at Green Scientific. I mean, we test Delta 8 products, and sure enough, most times, not all the time, but most times, the Delta 8 that they say is present. I can see it in my testing results, and we use a instrument called a chromatograph to find these things. But what I also see are other unknown substances in there that I don't see in like what we call clean distillate. In these products that come in, I just see other peaks that show up that I'm just not quite sure what they are. And that's unusual. It shows that these products are dirty, that the conversion technique, depending on who does it, whether it's in their mom's garage or a high functioning facility, there's just unknowns there. And what that means is that people are smoking or using product that they aren't sure what it is. Who knows what's in there. We don't know what the effects of that kind of thing are, because over time, it's hard to say if you use something now how it'll affect you 4 years from now. Sometimes disease and other things take time to develop in your body, and it's not always immediately clear. It doesn't seem like people are dropping, fortunately, as they use these products, but it's really like the unknown component that we just aren't sure how it's going to affect people over the long term, or the different byproducts, and how they are harming people.
I like your story of seeing Delta 8 THC Delta 8 at a gas station, as opposed to I guess a legal cannabis store. So let me push that a little bit further. Would you find THC Delta 8 at a legal cannabis dispensary? Would you find something like that?
You can. Now, I want to make it clear, like it's not like Delta 8 itself is seems to be fine, right? So it's not Delta 8, it's the stuff that's occurring with it if you don't produce it well. So there's actually some large manufacturers across the United States now that are legal cannabis manufacturers in various states where it's legal, that have started to incorporate Delta 8 into their products, and so they are getting that tested. Certainly they're getting it tested for pesticides and heavy metals and bacteria, mold. So that's a much more trusted product. I would say though, even with that, it's not perfect. We're still learning this, and even if you get Delta 8 in a legal system and you get it tested for those different tests that I just mentioned, like bacteria, pesticides, metals, like there's no regulations around testing for what's not supposed to be there for cannabinoids. So like let me put it this way, if I run a Delta 8 product and I see Delta 8 in there, all I'm required to do right now is to tell the manufacturer how much Delta 8 is there. Okay, you've got an 88% Delta 8 oil. Okay. There is no regulation or guidance as to what to do if you see other unknown sort of compounds in the product. It's there. As a scientist, I see that and I'm alarmed. It's not going to mean they can't sell that product. So even in product that is legally in a store, all that means is that product, and by the way, I want to say before I say this next part, the fact that they're getting it tested is a huge step up from people selling things in a gas station.
So I guess a person would really need to do some further investigation or have a further conversation with somebody at a cannabis dispensary or store. If they go in and they ask for THC Delta 8 or Delta 9, they really need to be careful, because they may be getting something that is sold at a legal store, but that has not been tested for some contaminants that might be harmful.
Well, again, it's tough. It's tough. At a legal store, they're going to be doing the best they can right now. And so if you're going to try Delta 8, I would say get it from a legal dispensary, because what that means is it's being sold and produced by a manufacturer who has a license, who bothered to go, and could go through that licensing process and is audited and regulated by the state, and has certain quality, procedures in place to make sure their product is as safe as can be, and as well formulated as they want it, as their internal specifications require. I certainly wouldn't try Delta 8 from a store that, from a non-legal dispensary or like a CBD store. Personally, I just don't want to get involved with Delta 8 right now. I don't want to try that because I just don't know where it's coming from. if you did want to try it, I would say get it from a legal dispensary, but just know that, yeah, they might, that dispensary is not required right now for them to report unknown contaminants or byproducts in the material. That's a risk. And that's a risk even in regular THC products. There's sometimes, depending on the manufacturer, and they're quite good now, so I don't see it as much. But if you're making Delta 9 and you kind of messed up, and let's say you overheated it, well, now you've got a lot of sort of byproducts and degradation products in there that the lab is not required to test for, or not, nor can they really identify, because that takes a lot more time and expensive instrumentation. So my sort of personal rule of thumb is I buy things that I know. I personally stick to flower. I know that what grew from Mother Earth is, as long as there's no pesticides or heavy metals or mold in there, which I can test for, what's coming out of that plant is naturally grown. And, I trust that. It's people have been smoking the herb for many, many years. And that's my personal go-to.
So I'm going to do something that I think there was a program on TV that talked about the Wayback Machine. So I'm going to put you in the Wayback Machine back to 2018. You wrote an article that talked about the 4 things I learned from the cannabis testing industry. And it had to do with imposing testing regulations. Regulations limit the scope of edibles, and testing labs still have a lot to do to catch up with the regulations. And then last but not least, California now has some of the cleanest weed around. So since then, if I can bring you from 2018 to 2022, so is there anything else that you've learned?
Anything else that I've learned? Whew. Wow. Well, yes, there's a lot that I've learned. Some of it, maybe I wish I hadn't, but it's a tough from the testing industry. What I'll say is, like, one of the most interesting things is, you would think that testing labs are all forthcoming, and they want to kind of, as I've always been trained as a scientist, that you really want to try to reach the most accurate, truthful result that you can. Whatever it is you're doing, the goal is to produce good, solid data that's reproducible, that represents the thing that you're doing, you're analyzing, or whatever it is. Okay, it's interesting that in California, as of this podcast, the last time I checked, there were, I think, 41 active cannabis testing labs in the state of California, which is a lot, too many. And what I've seen happen is that there's so much competition in the testing lab space, actually, from a business perspective, that a lot of these labs, whether they're large or they're kind of struggling to get started, are faking potency numbers. So just so you know, on the the kind of traditional way that we price weed is by the pound. You've got your turkey bag, open it up, smell it, bag appeal looks good. Used to be two grand per pound, and then you're good. So the price of weed has traditionally been sort of priced by how it smokes, what it looks like, how it smells. Now with testing results, it's like how high of a THC percentage is in there. And so I have clients that won't sell cannabis to dispensaries unless it's 20% THC or higher, and that's just kind of something that's developed in the legal market. But what some testing labs are doing is that obviously they understand this, right? And they would be more preferable from a client's point of view to test with a lab that will give them a higher result. So you have cannabis testing labs that are, basically inflating these results to a much higher degree. That means that their client is going to be able to sell their product for more. The testing lab is going to make more money because their client is using them more now, and everyone wins, right? And the problem is the state doesn't have enough resources to really, enforce or audit those laboratories that are doing this. It's really hard to catch too if they're they're clever. They can do it in a way where it's actually very hard to catch. It's actually gotten so bad in California that the governor just signed a bill a couple months ago maybe it was just last month actually, that is going to require all testing labs to use the same test method to test their potency, because labs can do it slightly differently. They're going to level the playing field and say you have to use this version of the test to get the potency number, because everyone's just giving different results. So I guess naively I learned that not all labs are built the same. Not all labs are giving you the same quality data. And I've always tried at every lab I've been to be as consistent and truthful in the data as possible, and to make sure I'm giving people the actual number they need. If somebody comes to me and they think they're getting a product that has a lot higher THC in it than actually is there, then they're going to have a different experience. It's not going to be what they expect. And at the end of the day, the testing labs are really what's giving the consumer the information. And if we're not accurate, or we're inflating numbers just to kind of do the business game, it's not fair to the end consumer, in my opinion. So that's one thing I've learned, is testing labs are not all the same.
With those over 40 labs here in California, would it be safe to say that a legal dispensary is using one of those labs that may not be that legit?
It's possible. I mean, the dispensary itself is buying products from, manufacturers and distributors. And so the dispensaries themselves are usually not the ones who say which lab to use. It's the brands and the companies.
The manufacturers.
Yeah, it's possible. It's very possible. In fact, it happens all the time. I know several labs where that's the case. And I get it from a business perspective. You want to try and impress your clients and maybe bring in some more business, but it's just not. It's not accurate. It's not the true result. So it's possible. I mean, the reality is it's just going to be a higher potency, and the worst case scenario is you get something that says it's really, really high, a high potency, and you smoke it, and it's not maybe as high as you thought it was. So the risk to public health is, admittedly pretty low, but it's sort of like, it's not what you might be getting something less than what says on the box. If you're buying something that says 35% THC, 39% THC, I've seen people question if that's even biologically possible from the plant's perspective. If you're talking about a plant that now has over 1/3 of the plant is just THC oil or trichomes and resin, it's like, is that even biologically possible, is a good question.
Right. That kind of brings us back to the beginning of our conversation when we were talking about cannabis enlightenment and knowledge. And I always say that, knowledge is power. And you've got to find out what it is you're going to put into your body, whether it's an edible, a drink, you're going to vape it, however you consume it, you've got to know where it came from and what the potency is of it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
On that note, I want to thank you sincerely, Chris, for helping out with this podcast. Your information was golden, and I only use that word when it's the top notch. Your information is golden, and I'm sure that a lot of people are going to be hanging on every word that you have talked about today. And once again, before we leave, you work at Green Scientific Labs?
Yeah, Green Scientific Labs. We're a cannabis laboratory based in Fort Lauderdale. We actually just opened our second location in Phoenix, Arizona, and we're expanding to New Jersey, Michigan, Illinois very soon. So we're in a growth phase, no pun intended.
Wow.
So it's really exciting. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to make a point this year to contact you and try to see if I can get into the Arizona. If I can get some type of tour through the Arizona lab, that'd be great.
Feel free to reach out. We may be in California before too long. The rate things are going, we're growing pretty quickly. So if that's the case, I'll be sure to, either way, reach out. We'd love to have you, give you a tour, have you take a video of the lab, whatever you'd like to do.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate your help.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks again. This is a pleasure. Great seeing you again.
If you'd like to hear more Cannabis Enlightened with Dr. Leroy, be sure to visit us online at cannabisenlightened.com and subscribe wherever you download your podcasts. Cannabis Enlightened is produced in San Diego, California, and presented by March and Ash at marchandash.com. On behalf of Dr. Leroy, I'm Chris Cantori, and thank you for listening.